Okay, I think we can get started here. Want to wish everybody a happy new year. I guess it's still early enough in January for me to be able to do that. So I want to welcome everyone to this evening's seminar. This is our first webinar for 2023. And my name is Eleanor Rangers. I'm the president of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Cold War Historical Society. We are just starting our 13th year, and we are an organization dedicated to preserving history through the memories of those who created it. A couple of announcements prior to this evening's History in Our Backyard webinar. Just a general reminder, and I've been kind of monitoring people being admitted to the webinar, so appreciate you indulging me with putting your names and so forth in there, because we had an unfortunate situation in October, and with a Zoom bombing event, and I want to make sure that doesn't happen again. So I appreciate you just giving me an identifier so I know who's coming on board. I do want to do the usual little plea that, as a 501c3 organization, a nonprofit organization, we do rely on the generosity of our donors. So if you so choose to donate to our organization, there are plenty of opportunities to do so. There is a donation button on our website, coldwarhistory.org, and we would certainly welcome any contributions to help us with some of our activities. I do want to mention, speaking of activities, something that's in the planning stages is a display room that will be in Warminster at the former building of the Johnsville Centrifuge, known now as the Fuge, an event center. So we are in the initial stages of actually putting a display room together. One of the first permanent display we are going to put together is on the P3 Orion. And I'm definitely looking forward to that. So my goal is to hopefully unveil at least part one of this display room by mid-year. So stay tuned on that. And, if you happen to be in the Warminster area, we will put announcements out about it. So we'd love to have you come over and take a look. And we probably can even set up tours of the centrifuge as well that day. So just wanted to give a plug for that, and more to come. Also just wanted to give you a reminder that for those of you who may occasionally be unable to make these webinars, we do record them and do archive them on our YouTube channel. I do try to add content, Cold War related or space race related content to our website, to our YouTube channel fairly regularly. So it is always worth taking a gander over there periodically as well for other content. We do also maintain a Facebook page where we put other announcements as well regarding webinars and also some other Cold War related historical information that we come across. We do have a widget that feeds over the Facebook posts to our website as well. So if you're not on Facebook, you will see the posts on our Facebook page at the bottom of the homepage. We do have a full schedule for webinars in 2023. And in fact, we've just added a webinar in December. Actually, David will be coming back in December for another webinar on some other aspects of the Minuteman program. So we will be getting an updated announcement out, but you can see our list here for the year. Pretty excited. In February, Beverly Weintraub, actually, who just wrote a book about the first female naval aviators, will be speaking for us. And so you can see the list of other talks throughout the year. For those who are local to the Warminster area in September, we will be having a live presentation by a former NADC engineer, Franz Bahn, who will be talking about his experiences as a Yugoslavian refugee as a child at the end of World War II. So very personal recollection, I think, fascinating history there, and definitely looking forward to that. And then we're also hoping to have, hopefully, a more extensive open house for Veterans Day in November. And there's just a little plug for Beverly Weintraub's book about the female aviators. Again, second Thursday of the month in February. I want to give a reminder as well, if you're in the Warminster area, to check out the Tranquility Brewing Company. It's a brewery and pub that is on site at the Fuge building, and they are open Thursday through Sunday and they do have a number of events there that regularly, and also on Sundays, they are offering tours of the centrifuge. If any of you have interest in that, or have family members, children, feel free to come over there for tours as well. Another thing that I'm hoping to reinitiate are our Cold War movie nights. Just prior to the pandemic, we had one event. That was when we had Gary Powers Jr. come for a special screening of Bridge of Spies, and then a Q&A with Gary afterwards. I am negotiating an interesting, actually a somewhat space race related or tail end of the space race related program to maybe kick this off in the spring. More details to come, but this is something that I would like to reinitiate. So I just wanted to give people a heads up of that, because I know a lot of people have asked us if we're going to have live events actually returning to Warminster. And just another reminder too, once we start the program, if you could mute your microphones and turn off your cameras, that just helps with bandwidth for our presentations. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker this evening, who is a return guest speaker to talk this evening, and that's David Stumpf. And he is a retired plant biochemist living with his wife, Susan, in Tucson, Arizona. Oh. He's written 3 nuclear weapon histories.
How can I mute my speaker?
I'm sorry?
Oh. Not my microphone.
How can you unmute or... Okay, I don't know if that was directed to me. But
right
David's written 3.
Oh.
Oh. Sorry about that. Actually, you know what? I'm going to mute.
The left hand.
There we go. I've just muted everybody except David and myself, or at least I think I have. Okay. Let's start over. So David Stumpf. So David is retired plant biochemist living with his wife in Tucson, Arizona. He's written 3 nuclear weapon histories. And actually, we've had the privilege of hearing about the history of Regulus, Titan, and Minuteman. Also, Dr. Stumpf has volunteered at the Titan Missile Museum in Arizona outside of Tucson. He was a tour guide and historian there for many years. And he was also instrumental in the effort to gain National Historic Monument status for that museum. This evening, David is going to be speaking on another missile-related topic, this time on missile impact location systems from 1959 to 2020. He also authored an article of the same name in Air History magazine. If any of you have interest in that, I can certainly circulate information on that following this webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things back over to David and get this party started.
Okay, I need to get to share. So let me get to that. Share screen. There we go. Turn on the sound. So hopefully everybody's seeing the first slide.
It's there we go. Oh, almost. There we go. Yep. We just need to have you go into slideshow, into show mode.
Me?
Yeah. We can see your screen, but it's not in the PowerPoint slideshow mode.
Oh, got it.
There we go. Yep.
Okay. Okay, so the topic tonight is, did we hit the target? As I wrote my books on Titan 1 and Titan 2 and Minuteman, it occurred to me I had no idea how they were able to determine the impact point in the broad ocean areas. So I decided I couldn't put that in either of the books. So I decided to do some research outside of those books, and this is a result of that. The article is in Air Power History. I think it's called Space and Air Power History now. So brief history of acoustic missile impact locating systems. And I say acoustic because they're obviously radar and photographic methods, but what intrigued me was the acoustic aspect of it. So the problem was how do you identify without radar? How do you identify where the missiles of the reentry vehicles have landed? So before we even worried about that, they had to decide where they're going to put the long-range test range. They investigated White Sands and Naval Air Station at Point Mugu, but neither of them had the range sufficiently long to accommodate the testing of something that had 1,000 to 5,000 nautical mile range. So after a long series of investigations, and actually it's kind of an interesting story. I was on the Library of Congress website looking for something else, and I found a report that I was told didn't exist at all anymore. It was under guided, just the term guided missiles at the Library of Congress. And here was this full report that I've been looking for almost 6 months. Anyway, so they decided the best place to do this was El Centro as the start point, the launch point, and they launched down the Gulf of California. So the little yellow dots, El Centro, they launched down the Gulf of California. And of course, the Mexican authorities would agree to this because it was a great idea. The Mexican authorities said, there's no way we're going to permit this. And after fighting a little bit with the Defense Department, the State Department, they punched that and went to the next alternative. But before that, I wanted to show you the flight path. It was going to go from El Centro down. Interestingly enough, the nearest city to the probable endpoint, if it made it 4,700 miles, was a city called Los Angeles, which I thought was kind of interesting that there was another Los Angeles in the, and that was the endpoint. Okay. So I'm actually missing something on my screen here. Okay. Let me just move that over. So Baja California wasn't the way to go. So they decided to go to Cape Canaveral. And Cape Canaveral had all these locations for radar sites down the Bahamas. But what was interesting, the nearest, first acquisition point for radar was about 90 miles from the Cape at the time, at Jupiter, Florida, which caused a little bit of discussion because it was too far away for the initial information they needed just at launch. So they negotiated with the British authorities and got permission to put the various radar stations in. And they got down to St. Lucia, but that wasn't far enough. They wanted to go all the way to Ascension. So that's 3,000 miles from St. Lucia to Ascension, or 4,500 nautical miles from Cape Canaveral to Ascension. Most of that's an open ocean. So again, the problem still presents itself. How do you locate the impact point? Then they made the decision in 1956 to locate operational training and testing of ICBMs and IRBMs at Vandenberg, which was at that point still Camp Cook. Only problem there was, again, ocean. The IRBM target area was 300 to 1,500 nautical miles off the coast of California. There's nothing there. The ICBM targets were 28 to 4,400 nautical miles off the coast. But luckily, there were some islands near there. So this represents their problem. And the light green is the IRBM locations. And Midway was 2,800 miles away. Wake was 3,800 miles away. Kwajalein was 42, and Eniwetok was 4,000 nautical miles. Later on with Peacekeeper, they would fly to a site off of Guam, which is 5,100 nautical miles away. In all cases, they still needed a way to detect the impacts in the ocean outside the range of the radar, because they couldn't get the radar up high enough. So the solution, luckily in 1941, Dr. Maurice Ewing at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, postulated the existence of a deep sound channel. Now, This was first indicated in 1934 by Carl Dyke and an O.W. Swanson. They were setting off explosive charges, looking 0.5 pound explosive charges of TNT off the coast of Southern California. Experiments by the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey. And they found that they could detect signals up to 50 miles away, which no one had even conceived of. They didn't pursue it further, but Dr. Ewing found it quite interesting. And he and his co-workers went to work and found that indeed there was something they called the deep sound channel. They postulated that, and then they confirmed it in 1944. And the range, deep sound channel range, was likely 10,000 nautical miles or more, which was astounding at the time. Now, what Ewing wanted to do was use it to communicate between submarines and also to map the ocean floor very accurately. But that was the Navy wasn't all that interested in that. So here's an example of the theory behind it. Let's see. On the left is the speed of sound in seawater versus depth. And you'll see that there's a speed difference of roughly 2,000 feet per second. 200 feet per second. The sound channel is where it was slowest. And that confuses a lot of people because you'd think it'd be counterintuitive. But the longer ray paths arrive sooner at the receiver due to the higher speed of sound in the region they're traveling in. Paths within the deep sound channel are the slowest and also the most numerous. So the strongest signal comes through the sound channel because the refractive index of the water in the deep sound channel keeps the sound pretty much focused in that layer. The last strongest signal to arrive comes via the shortest path. So along the axis of the deep sound channel. And this is a typical sonic, I don't know what they call them, a sonogram, that's what I would call it. Lots going on here. Number one is the background noise. If you've ever worked with strip chart recorders and signals, it's part of almost an art to be able to tell when the signal is starting. You can see there, number two shows that a trained observer would see that that's the start of the signal because the baseline's starting to rise. And number four is the point of measurement, the on-axis energy arrival. So they had banks of equipment. This is they needed to determine, well, let me back up. The sound channel axis velocity experiments were conducted because the Polaris program was going to be launching. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Let's see if you can. It was going to be launching in this area, the 1,000 nautical mile area off the Cape. And that was too far away from Antigua and Barbados to use radar properly. So they needed to get a network of SOFAR, sound fixing and ranging the stations. So they put one at Ascension, put one in Barbados, another at Bermuda, and another at the Canary Islands. And this allowed them to isolate, and by measuring the time delay between the various stations, they could accurately pinpoint where the RVs were hitting the water for the Polaris program. And interestingly enough, just doing a search for SOFAR, I found a guy on the internet who worked in Bermuda for many years on this program. What else do I want to say about that? I think that's pretty much it. So the typical layout was the hydrophones at Ascension Island for a target array, which is this pentagonal array, and a broad ocean array, which is the rest of them. The pentagonal shape was used so that at least 4 hydrophones were at a range less than the refraction limit, thereby enabling them to pick up the sound of the impact by direct transmission instead of bottom and surface reflection paths. Accuracy was with this design was within 30 feet, plus or minus 30 feet, when the impact was within the confines of an array of at least 10 nautical miles across. Trying to find the locations of the hydrophones, I had to go to the people that study whale communication, and they use these systems now that are retired. They use them for research on whales. In a broad ocean array, if you're not anywhere near the land, they set up these arrays as pictured here. You have underwater floats keeping these hydrophones suspended in the sound channel. Then you'd have these articulated anchors that would hold them in place. And then the long line would go back to the recording station. The calibration of the broad ocean array hydrophones consisted of a ship releasing several SOFAR bombs. At the same time, the ship's position was being accurately determined by geodetic methodology off the bottom transponders. This is a more modern version. Well, something's wrong here. The sonobuoys, the aircraft would interrogate sonobuoys that they had dropped in a particular pattern, and then the acoustic information picked up by the sonobuoys was transmitted to the aircraft using VHF. So how did they locate these sonobuoys accurately? There was a series of deep ocean transponder arrays previously placed on the ocean bottom. They were used to determine the position. The batteries on these bottom hydrophone transponder arrays would last 3 or 4 years. The velocity buoy measures the velocity of sound in the water, which varied depending on season. So they had to calibrate these arrays. After they dropped them, they'd calibrate them shortly before a reentry event was going to happen to make sure everything was as accurate as possible. So this is a description of the unclassified missile impact locating system components of the Eastern Test Range. I found it fascinating that still at this time, and was what, 50 years, nearly 50 years since, that there are still classification issues. So there are target arrays at Ascension, Antigua, and Grand Turk. There are broad ocean area stations at Barbados, Antigua, Puerto Rico, Grand Turk, the Eleuthera, Cape Hatteras, Bermuda, and Ascension. There was another one in the Eastern Atlantic, but that's still considered classified. Then the bottom transponders were located in these sites with the yellow triangles. So they had it pretty well covered. The target arrays were enormous. They're at a depth of 3 miles, which to me is very, I don't know much about oceanography, but 3 miles down, 15,000 feet below the surface, 5 nautical miles across, 35 nautical miles west to northwest at a depth of 2 miles, and 75 miles north of Grand Turk at a depth of 3 miles, 25 nautical miles across. So these were massive arrays, and the accuracy was quite good. The SOFAR Mills stations were quite a few of them, more so than I noted on that first map. Most of them were broad ocean area because this allowed greater flexibility in the targeting of the reentry vehicle impacts. They didn't have to worry about going as close to to Antigua or Grand Turk. So this is for the Mark II reentry vehicle of Atlas and Thor, they had these data capsules. General Electric developed a recoverable data capsule. The technicians assembling the two hemispheres of the recoverable capsule. The hemisphere on the left contains two die packs and the data recorder, as well as the SOFAR bomb. That's the bomb there. In the back is a fully assembled unit before it's placed in the Mark II reentry vehicle. This had a rocket assist that pushed it away from the RV and allowed it to then land in the ocean. And when it landed in the ocean, no parachute, landed in the ocean, the water was sensed by a sensor, and they would start the beacon flashing, the radio beacon. Minuteman, the first Minuteman reentry vehicle, the Mark V, had a SOFAR bomb. When I first started working on the Minuteman book, I had no idea what a SOFAR bomb was. And I took a while to find out, but it was located where I show with the little yellow dot. They didn't, they had a problem, believe it or not, the Mark V would float. The initial design would float. And they were very concerned that the Soviets would pick one up. The SOFAR bombs would go off once it sank to a predetermined depth of around 3,000 to 4,000 feet for the Atlantic. The SOFAR bomb would go off, and that would radiate through the sound channel, and they could pick up the location. On the Pacific, they didn't have anywhere near as many stations scattered around the periphery. They had one at Point Sur and Point Arena, and then one at Kenaway, Hawaii. The Navy was interested, first of all, in this for locating down crewmen, aircraft crew. And so the aircraft would carry these SOFAR bombs that the crew, if they survived the water impact, would release. They would toss over the side of the life raft. They'd sink to the predetermined depth, detonate, and then they could locate within about 10 nautical miles where the detonation had taken place, significantly narrowing down the search region for the crews. That system was incorporated into the Pacific Missile Range Missile Impact Locating System in 1960 timeframe. So here are the regions that they needed to cover. The IRBM for Thor and Pershing was the area indicated. Then at Midway and at Wake, they had something called Mills miniature systems we'll talk about in a minute. And then Eniwetok corridor and Coisland also had systems later on. This is the system at Wake. And again, this was interesting. I found this because of the research I did looking into whale communications between whales. I couldn't find it from a Navy or an Air Force standpoint. But again, you see the pentagonal array and you see the Wake Island Broad Ocean Array. The miniature impact locating system was sort of like a broad ocean array. I'm not sure why they called it this, but these were located right off, relatively near to the island, and they would form a corridor which would allow for impacts between them to be accurately located. Not many reentry vehicle flights were flown to Wake or Midway, but the initial Minuteman flights were flown to Midway. In Eniwetok, they had something called the all-weather impact locating system. Initially at Eniwetok, they had just cinematographic monitoring, which meant all the flights had to be during the daytime. And if the weather was socked in the 30-minute flight, 25-minute flight to Coisland or Eniwetok, they were out of luck because the cinematographic stuff would be prevented from locating the impact. So they went to this all-weather hydrophone system, and in the lagoons, they had these hydrophones and buoys that would allow an accurate indication of where the RVs hit. So in this case, they just went for a splash signal, and that's what the point of measurement indicates here. It was a very clear and crisp signal, so they didn't have to worry about interpretation that much. So off of Kwajalein, they had this array. The original missile impact scoring system was east of Kagan Island. It's 49 square miles and installed in 1996 and upgraded in 2014. These are the list of the mill stations in between 1960 and 1963. This is a more modern version of the buoys. This is self-propelled and deployed off of a special ship. And it's called the Livermore Independent Diagnostic Scoring System. And interestingly enough, there's quite a bit of information about these rafts on the Livermore website. And they have a detector that detects when there's an airburst explosion from an RV. That can detect, the neutron detectors on board these rafts can pinpoint the height of the neutron event, which is just triggering the neutron source in an RV. I thought that information being on the web was amazingly, I couldn't believe they had that on the web. But then this is the latest version, and this is a self-propelled portable impact locating system, which is another way of doing the deep broad ocean detection. So you can see the little propeller on the side. This thing would float and be propelled into position. Then it could station keep using GPS. So they knew very accurately where it was. And that meant with a gaggle of these around a probable impact area, they could get a very accurate location. Just briefly, this is an example of a phototheodolite cinematographic system. They had towers. This is a 100-foot tower on Perry Island, 300-foot tower on Perry Island. I'm not sure how they got the equipment up there, and I'm not sure I would have wanted to go up to service the equipment. This is a tower for the radar. Its antennas were mounted on 100-foot towers and could detect a splash of 27 feet minimum height and 3-second minimum duration that ranges up to 20 nautical miles. The accuracy was quite high, but that meant the target had to be within the lagoon. I like this picture, one, because it shows the cameras, but I used to have a Sears Roebuck drill press, and these stands look an awful lot like the drill press stand I had. So I guess the government doesn't always have to build their own equipment. So just real quickly, these are the target areas for Minuteman. It went in a WATOC between 1962 and 1969. And then when they converted all the targets to Kwajalein in 1965 to 1971. So we briefly discussed the acoustic missile impact locating systems. They were fixed and mobile. There was the target array, the pentagonal, or the MISS, broad ocean array. And that was a Sonobuoy missile impact locating system deployed by P3s. There was a portable impact locating system 1 and 2. That was the floats, self-propelled floats with GPS. Then there was Livermore's independent diagnostic scoring system. All-weather impact locating system. Bottom missile. What they did after the all-weather impact locating system tended to be very difficult to maintain. So they ended up taking them and putting them on the bottom instead of having them float. then the miniature impact scoring system with the small 4 hydrophone arrays at Wake and Midway and Kwajalein. And that's all I've got. So I'm be happy to entertain questions now if anybody has any questions.
I definitely have a question. So this was detecting missile splash in the oceans, but
no, the only ones that did the splash were the splash detection system in the lagoons. The rest were SOFAR bombs going off, and they detect that explosion at the various sites around the periphery of the Atlantic, or the periphery of the Pacific.
Okay, all right.
They use that also they didn't use it for Gemini, but they used it for a couple of launch of Mercury capsule recoveries, because they didn't know if they'd be coming down anywhere nearby. If they weren't on target, they needed some way to find them. So, but the astronauts weren't thrilled with having an explosive device in the capsule, which I can imagine would be a little bit disconcerting.
Yeah, although they did have explosive bolts on their hatch, interestingly enough.
Yeah, but that meant they could get out. That didn't mean it was a matter of locating.
Yeah. Happy to open it up for other questions from the group.
Yeah, I have a comment, not a question, if there's no other questions.
Either way, go for it.
Yeah, good evening, David. I was in the Air Force from 70 to 74, and I was put into the Minuteman maintenance system. I was out at Vandenberg in the spring of 72 with a program where we were pulled missiles out of our strategic alert silos in Minot, North Dakota, and we set them up at Vandenberg, and they went off to, I guess, from what you were saying, Kwajalein. I knew it was Kwajalein or Anahuac. So these were the MERV warheads. This would have been three warheads per launch. And there was a program going. They were pulling missiles out of every Minuteman wing and shooting them off. And I was lucky. I when I just got to was qualified to be a qualified maintenance troop finally, I just caught the tail end of the program at Minot. I caught the last ones that were pulled at Minot at the time. Those were called glory trips.
Yeah. I wanted to go and see a reentry event, and I found out it would cost about $5,000 back in the day, 4 or 5 years ago, to go see it. So I tried to talk my wife into letting me do that. We didn't get very far because my point of contact at Global Strike Command said, David, let's say we get you out there. There's nothing saying the Air Force isn't going to change its mind and program the flight to go to somewhere else. Not only that, if there are any kind of delays, you could be out there for weeks waiting for the impact. And $5,000 for 5 seconds worth of reentry vehicle, not worth it. So I don't know that it wouldn't have been worth it, but I didn't go. And then COVID hit, and going out there with COVID was next to impossible. And then getting off the island was next to impossible. But I've seen film of a Poseidon event or Peacekeeper event where 10 RVs come in, and it is striking, just striking.
Well, I was at Vandenberg. Of course, I remember seeing a night launch.
Yeah.
And
not spectacular.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, the normal layman sees all these manned missions or whatever in the daytime. This was a night launch. So the first stage starts falling off, the second stage burns, and then that falls off in the third stage. So they're all tumbling to earth, and they're white. So they must be like 100, 200, 300 miles apart, but they're falling to earth. And so they twinkle, they flash. And it was interesting to see all those stages. And, you know, at that point, the reentry vehicle is much further off.
Well, I was fortunate enough for the Titan II book, I was able to go and watch the launch of the Space Launch Vehicle version of Titan II. And it was interesting. I said I'd go as close as they'd let me, which wasn't very close. I said, I sign whatever you want me to sign. I want to be closer. So it was only, the missile was only about that big on the horizon. And the staging, all the crowd gasped. Something's going to blow up. But the staging of a Titan II had a red puff of the lead with the nitrogen tetroxide. Then I got a chance to see a Minuteman launch at night. And I wanted to take film of it with my camera, and the photographic troupe that was with me said, don't waste your time. It's going to overwhelm your camera. We're taking plenty of photos. We'll send you some. So I really liked her advice because I was able to just sit and watch this thing leap out of the silo compared to a Titan II.
Yeah.
It was incredible. But yeah, the staging. In fact, in Tucson, I once watched a Delta launch from Vandenberg. I knew about it, and I could see it from all the way from Tucson. You could see it, and as it reached into the upper atmosphere, it was extraordinary. Never forget it.
Yeah, much louder than the Minuteman. You can hear that rumble from so far away.
Yeah, really something.
Eleanor, I have a question.
Absolutely.
Were the Russians monitoring these? And if so, how did they know when they went off? Was the schedule made public? And I guess the second question is, what altitude were they flying at, and did they let airlines know about them?
That's the airline. That's a good question. I don't have an answer for that. I'm assuming they did, because something like that rising out of the off of the Cape or Vandenberg would be somewhat distressing to an airline pilot. The Soviets were constantly monitoring this. There's an interesting story about, in my Titan II book, about the N7 launch, which was the first launch out of Vandenberg that went awry at 18,000 feet. And the RV tumbled into the ocean pretty close to Vandenberg, but in plain sight of a trawler. So they hurriedly went out and found it. And that's an interesting story in itself. I'd written a book on the Regulus program, and Regulus 2 had an inertial guidance system made by GE. And that was done in a base GE facility in Santa Barbara. So for some reason, I decided to call Santa Barbara to see if they had any information about this RV dumping in the ocean. And the guy answered the phone and said, "Hi, David, how you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing fine. I'm looking for this information." And he leaned over and he said, "Hey, Sid, you want to talk to this guy about diving and recovering that N7 reentry vehicle?" So I'd stumbled across the actual divers that had gone and retrieved the RV. And that was, they did that before the Russians got to it. But the interesting story, part of the end of the story, was they spent hours trying to find it and then attaching the hoist mechanism to it. So they were intimate with the reentry vehicle and the warhead, mock warhead, for hours. When they put it on board the ship, the recovery vessel, the divers weren't allowed back to look at it because it was top secret and they weren't cleared, even though they've been spending hours on it trying to get it off the ocean floor.
Were the Russians privy to did they know about the launch schedule? And if so, how did they find out about it?
Well, I'm not sure how often Aviation Week and Space Technology published anything, but a friend of mine from Lockheed Martin said they used to call aviation leak in space technology. Yeah. But no, it's an interesting question how they found out. I don't know. I don't think it was necessarily nefarious. I think it may have been just monitoring notice to airmen.
Yeah,
when it was up and working.
Yeah. Well, that's another story.
If they can get within visual range of Vandenberg, and we're there all the time, they can watch the missile site activity. They see the missiles getting lowered, and there's microwave link testing going on. Now, once our missiles were put in silos, it was kind of a real test for the launch capsule crews. I don't think they knew exactly when it was going to go off.
They didn't.
And we like to soak what we call soak those missiles for maybe up to 2 weeks. So they had like a real launch scenario where they didn't know when it was exactly going to happen, and they get just like a real strategic war type situation to launch it.
Bill, that's the crews didn't know when it was going to go off, but where they were located with their capsules had all kinds of other equipment in it. So if that was manned, then they would know something was going to happen. But that was manned for many days as they were testing the missile to make sure it was going to behave, the telemetry was going to behave properly. That was one of the problems with the testing at Vandenberg. They changed the aerodynamics of the missile significantly by putting on the external raceways had to accommodate all the telemetry cabling. And so that changed the aerodynamics not insignificantly.
Yeah. The other thing is the people who knew the launch were the photographic squadron people who had to be set up to film it. So they were the one leak point. And
that's a good point.
Actually, we had a comment from chat by Michael Gross, who's attending this evening, and he was wondering what your thoughts are about the SpaceX launch capabilities now with the ability to return the first stage of their launch vehicle. I
think that is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. I had a nephew that worked for SpaceX at that time, and he said one day, and I'm not sure how true this is, but it sounds to me like a typical Musk story. One day he came in and looked at all his engineers and said, I want to recover the first stage, make it happen. And nobody raised their hand and said, but you can't do that. They all tackled it and came up within months in an incredible solution. And now I don't know if any of you have seen the dual return mission where the two stages land at once. That's science fiction for me.
Yeah.
Of course, doing that with a Saturn V first stage would have been really, would have been impressive.
Yeah, although I heard a rumor that what's his next that huge rocket that he wants to launch, that he's moved down to the Cape. I've heard rumors they might be testing that very soon. Big silver rocket that he has.
Yeah, there's an acronym for that, which I can't say over the airway.
Yeah, the BFR.
Yeah, BFRC, big something red cloud.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to take silence as a no, but this was another great presentation, David. Very interesting, and I always learn something new every time we have you on our webinars. So definitely looking forward to having you back in December, which I'll make sure I update our listing. But we're going to have you back to talk about another aspect of the Minuteman program. So more details to come soon on that for everybody.
Look forward to it. Thanks everybody for attending, and I hope if you're interested in reading the article with more detail, it's an Air Power History.
Yeah,
I don't remember the date.
I can send out a link to everybody. I'll send a link on my distribution list so you receive it.
You can go to the archive. There's an archive of the articles and the volumes at their website. And for some reason, they're allowing missiles to be discussed more than just aircraft. But they're very interested in the topic, so I'm taking advantage of it.
Yeah, there you go. All right, very good. All right, well, please join us on February 9th for our next webinar featuring a discussion on the first women naval aviators. So definitely looking forward with that. That'll be with our guest speaker, Beverly Weintraub. So thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your support. And Have a good evening, everybody. And thanks again, David.
You're welcome. And thank you all for watching.